Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session. I realise there was lots of other sessions which you could have gone to, so I feel flattered, and I'm sure Adam does too.
I do.
We are using technology to work smarter and not harder, which is essentially what we have learned from our clients' common mistakes, requests, and their common questions, essentially. Because this session was all about what we have learnt from Communities 2, running this project for 6 years. Myself, I've worked on the project for 4 years, and Adam
myself as well.
The same as well. So we've been dealing with a lot of clients throughout that time, and a lot of the same questions have come up. So we've sort of come up with some guidance for you guys in the future, and what we'd like to pass on the knowledge of what we've learnt. So who are we? That's a good question.
Well, my name is Adam Williams. I'm the Circuit Rider for North Wales, and I cover the counties of Anglesey, Gwynedd, Conwy and Denbighshire.
And I am James Reichelt. I cover Caerphilly, Blanagwent and Torfaen. Yes, you can come in, of course you can. You have to take the seats at the front though. No. Brilliant. So, yes, that's us too. We are both circuit riders on the Communities 2.0 programme, which is a job title which is what IT people tend to come up with, so we do have to then put in the explanation of what we actually are. We are offering, well, we offered and continue to offer IT consultancy for charities, social enterprise and small businesses. We provide support through going through people's quotations, through specifying the technology which they require, and we review the IT within organisations and tend to field every other question about IT at the same time. So when people were asking questions to anyone in the group within Communities 2, it seemed to just fall back to us to answer those questions and then push the answers back out in the way they were going.
I'd say we used to be allowed to go in and be a lot more hands-on, although over the past 2 years I'd say we spent most of our time showing clients how to sort it out themselves and just aiding them to find people to do it for them so that they could do it again and again in future.
Yes, definitely. So, what we're going to cover in today's session, I tended to specialise more on the website and the online side of things. So, I'm going to talk about the people wanting websites and their common mistakes and our common process which we took our clients through to make sure that they got the website. I'm going to move from there, it's squeaking. The process which we took them through to make sure that they got the website that they wanted out of their developers. So dealing with developers, looking at the design of websites, making sure that the design of the website is accessible, making sure it meets the standards which we would expect them to. And then Adam, what
I'll be talking about slightly more boring stuff, not as creative what James will be talking about. I'll be looking more about servers, and a personal interest of mine is hardware, and I very often through many of the clients we've seen, they've had servers set up at their companies and they're paying a lot of money for them when they really don't need them. And also be looking at when you should think of upgrading your equipment and the best approach to take for that.
Hello.
And sorry.
There's a seat there and then a seat there.
And I'll also be looking at the type of backups you should be making, and as well as offering Wi-Fi to any of your clients or guests that come to your business.
Brilliant. So we did think we were going to do like a sort of tag team between each other so that I could rest my voice between talking a lot, which I will be doing. But unfortunately, because we've got two quite different subjects, I'm going to talk about that. Then Adam's going to talk about his stuff. And then we're going to have questions and answers afterwards, so then we'll go informal and things. I'm not going to be informal enough to turn the chair around and have it back facing that way, but Robert Downey Jr. style, not going to do that, but we will take questions and things afterwards. So let's go. So, brilliant. One of the most common questions which we received was, we want a website, we want to be online. That's fantastic. We want everyone to be online. That's the point of why we're here. We're trying to make sure that the organisations which we support are out there on the internet, findable, searchable, which is brilliant. But we needed our organisations to understand why they wanted that. It's all well and good to be like, oh, we know we need a website, but knowing that isn't enough in some cases. It's why you want the website, what you need the website to actually do for your organisation. Some people want to have websites which are just brochure websites, which just highlight the things which you have achieved, highlight the things which you can do for your service users. And that's fine, but other people might want to have a website that engages that community in a new and interesting way. Maybe you want to be receiving content from your service users which you can then put back online and celebrate. That's all well and good, but we just need to make sure we pin that down, and also that it needs to be pinned down within your organisation's capabilities of doing that and achieving that. So we would always ask the question, why do you want a website? What do you want it to do? Who do you want it to reach? Do you want it to be your service users who are going to be using your website? If that's the case, you're going to want a slightly different website to the website which you may aim at your stakeholders. If you want to be showing off your organisation to people who may be your funders, you would need a slightly different tact for the content on your website for that. Use different language, use different graphic design. Think about all of those things. So that's the first part of what we would take an organisation through when thinking about just that question of saying, well, we want a website, how do we do that? Okay, cool. And also, finally, are there other options? Is a website definitely going to do what you want it to do? Is there something else? Is it going to be the fabled app? Which makes me cringe, because there's lots of reasons why you may want to use an app, and there's lots of reasons why you may not want to use an app. Anyway. If people already have a website, the usual thing which I notice is that if they have a good or bad user interface. So I'm coming at this from a sort of graphic design sort of standpoint, but I also want people to consider what they're doing with their website and how they're conveying the information on that site. Are you going to use a lot of iconography? Are people going to understand what those icons mean? So when people access your site, they're entering into a conversation with your organisation. You're setting the tone of that conversation. This is your opportunity to show who you are through design, through colours, through font choice, through icons. Hello. And I personally want you to consider those things while you're in the just concept phase, because if you want to have a wall of text on your website, okay, that might be what you need to have on your website, but what does that say about you? That says, like the service user, needs to pay attention and read a lot and be informed and take the time to understand all that text. Is there another way of doing it? Can you say everything with just a photograph of just some smiling faces, some people using your service? So setting the tone through your user interface, through how your website is designed, is important. And if you do get this wrong, people may not use your service. People may use a competitor, if you have competitors, or find someone else doing something similar. If at the end of the day is going to be inadequate for your users, they may not use you. They may find something else. It's very easy to find other organizations out there which do similar things. So if you want those users, you're going to need to set the tone of the conversation which you are doing, the correct tone for the users which you want to reach, and make sure that they understand you. So those are things which are considered. So I have some examples of what I think a bad user interface is, because we were going to put it out to the field and ask you to say, judge our websites live, and I thought, well, this is being filmed. So I brought up some examples. This is quite a famous one. This is lingscars.com. Anyone come across this? Oh, it's designed to be as bad as possible. That's the point of this website. But if your site does look like this, please don't. Please don't. It also plays music. I've turned it. It's just a screenshot, but it will play loud, thumping music down the thing. All of this animates. I don't know how successful Ling's Cars has been. I think it's become quite a popular meme on the internet where everyone shares it because it's like this. But if your site looks anything like this, particularly the backgrounds, no textured backgrounds, please. We want simple, lovely interfaces. So let's go on to something which I personally, you can turn around and say to me after this that all my examples are not suitable, but this is a site called Nautilus, which is much cleaner, much nicer. Things which I picked out in this website is that it is trying to be a magazine-style website, yet none of the pictures are, the text does not overlay the picture. There's no transparency there, which means you can actually read the text, because that's always a problem. Readable text, make sure your text can be read. If you've got text there, make sure people can read it. And that's also one of my preferred websites, so I like going on there and browsing around. An award-winning website is our fantastic gov.uk. The reason why it's award-winning is because it does exactly what it's supposed to. There are no pictures on this website. The text is clean. You can find out exactly what you need to know. I mean, that's what it's there for. It doesn't need to be flash. Think about the council websites, which, apologies if any people are here from the councils here, but council websites tend to, so I'm not naming any names, have images and PDF files to download and interfaces that go down the screen and then across the screen. The gov.uk website, this is responsive. It will look good on any device. It's searchable, so you can search straight away. You can see the popular things that people are looking for. Plain text, easy to read. It is accessible because screen readers and such can read that page with no problem, and does what it says on the tin. Another example. This is Codecademy, which is a fantastic service, by the way. I'm going to quietly plug this service in that if you want to learn how to code, this is a fantastic way of doing it. It will teach you basic web design, basic HTML, CSS, etc. And it's all free. But go on their website, learn to code interactively for free. That's what you do on this website. That's the front page of their website. You type in your login details and click Get Started, and you're into your first lessons on how to code. Within 2 clicks and a little bit of typing, you're away and the website is achieving its purpose, which is good design. At the end of the day, it doesn't have to be flash, it doesn't have to be overworked, it doesn't have to be a Volkswagen Beetle, it can just be a Ford Fiesta. It just has to do what it needs to do. It needs to get you from A to B. Your content is the most important thing on the website. You need to use a familiar visual language. Don't reinvent the wheel, don't create new icons and things. I've used icons on all of this presentation, by the way, which are the Google material ones. I didn't credit them, so I do have to say. They're free, open source to use. But things like the map cursor, which we see, the pin on maps online. If you're making a map, why not use the same language that other maps are using online? Why not use the same symbol for language translation? Why not use the same symbol for your user interface and password locks and things? If you use familiar visual language, your service users are going to thank you for it at the end of the day. Because if everything slowly uses this language, they're not going to get confused. They're going to find out what they need to know. And be consistent which is going back to certain council websites and things, I often notice that these aren't consistent websites. Sometimes they have parts of the website that look completely different to other areas of the website because they're just older, or they haven't been maintained. Not all council websites, but a lot of websites, in fact. When older parts of the website get dragged up into today's standards, we often go, ooh, that looks a bit weird. They're often squashed into the middle of the screen and the content is small and hard to read. So make sure that you've got a consistent design across the whole thing. And where do we come in? So what we did across the Communities 2 project was implement a specification for websites. And this was how to get what we wanted and what you wanted from your website. Always draw up a specification when you're going out to pitch for tendering for development or even developing in-house, just to make sure that you've got your goals laid out. It's how to get what you want, particularly if you're working with different developers of your website. You need to have something to hold them accountable for what they are doing for you. They're providing you a service, you are receiving a product. The product is your website, you want to get what you want. So we assisted with specifications. We were very specific within these documents. Most of it was outlining the fact that we wanted people to use a content management system on their website because a surprising number of websites were still using just plain HTML pages which didn't draw content in, or were just using often free website things like Weebly and Wix and services such as that. That might be fine for your organization, but if you wanted to pitch out to a developer and they came back to you with a Weebly website, you may have some strong conversations to have with them. And within Communities 2, we have had that happen. So that is something which we learned, is that in the specification, say, we asked for a content management system. Content management systems, CMSs, things like WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, ModX. There's hundreds of them out there. The big ones, obviously, are WordPress, Joomla, and Drupal. I think it's 60% of the web is now WordPress, so popular, make sure it's working. You guys are the experts in your organization, so it's up to you to communicate that to the developers. So in the specification, you do need to outline who you are, what it is you want, why you do what you do, and enter into that conversation with the developer. So that's something else. Sometimes we found that our clients would just give a developer say, build us a website and then walk away without the developer really understanding who that organization is. It's up to you to engage your developer. It's up to you to create that conversation. Build your own knowledge. Codecademy is an excellent way of doing that. Of content management and hosting as well. So within your organization, we want to make sure that once the development of your website is done, your website can be turned over to you and you can update it. It's down to you. So you're not paying them any more money, or if they are, make sure that you understand what you're asking for. So build your knowledge about how content management systems work. Build your knowledge about how the hosting of your website works. I have spent endless phone calls trying to track down who owns a domain name and why they own it and not the organization. If you work for an organization that doesn't own its domain name, it's in the name of someone within the organization, transfer it to the organization, because if that person leaves or anything happens to that person, you're going to need to get their information and you're going to need to claim your domain back. So building your knowledge of hosting, realize what reasonable prices are for your hosting of the website. Understand what it means when you have MySQL hosting on your package and why that costs a little more, and why you might not want to pay for other features which the host might be offering, which you don't need. Just understand what these companies are selling you and how it adds up. So once you've drawn up your specification, Of course, if any of you want to see any of our specifications, speak to us afterwards and we can email you like the templates across, like what we would use. Respect the developer's time. Coming from the other side of things, I've developed websites for people, and it is frustrating when someone keeps coming back asking for minute changes to something which you signed off on 3 to 6 months ago. As long as you respect my time, and as long as you respect the developer's time, and they respect your time, you're all good to go. So we would build in a time frame which would have rounds of changes into the development. So you would have 2 rounds of changes. So after that point, unless it was bug fixing, the client is happy with the design, the developer builds that design, and then it is signed off on. The developer's done their job, the client has signed it off. So that protects the development side and you to some extent from nitpicking and pulling things apart. Retain your moral rights is something which we often came across as well. Making sure that if a developer delivers a product to you, the website to you, they do not hold any of the keys to your website after that point, or they've handed over all of the account information so that you can access everything of that website. You want to make sure that if, for any instance, your website goes down, you have access to the backups to be able to put it back up. You need to make sure that the developer isn't going to charge you for their time going back into the website to fix something which you may have done. You want to maintain your moral rights to all the code of the website, unless it's open source, of course, then it's open source and it should be delivered anyway. As long as, essentially, make sure you've got your password, make sure you've got the code, make sure you've got a backup of your website once it's delivered to you, and that the developer is not holding any of the content hostage for any reason. Then we went on to the things that get missed by organisations when developing their site. Translation. We are in Wales. We need Welsh and English web pages, particularly if you're being funded for those web pages. Check with whoever's funding you, of course, but it tends to be 98% of the time a requirement to have things in Welsh and English. Please don't use Google Translate. It comes up with language that is neither Welsh nor English nor anything. It gets the point across, roughly, but it's not good use of the language. And that is just from people telling me that, because I don't speak Welsh, unfortunately. But please make sure that your website is translated into both Welsh and English. Accessibility. We need to make sure that your websites meet accessibility standards. That can be having run it through a system like SortSite. We can tell when your website has been is not appropriate. It needs to have the losing my mind. Contrast and brightness on the website, so it can be changed by individuals so that they can use it how they want to. It needs to be, the font needs to be able to scale up and down depending on the individual's preference. All of this is making your site easier to use by your service users. Just because it may mess up a fancy design, I don't care about that. I just care that that website works for whoever it is you're going for. Privacy policy and cookie policy, terms and conditions. Those things need to be on your website, particularly if you're taking any money from anyone. Even if it's just donations, even if it is an eBay store which you may have linked to, please define in your privacy policy that you are not saving data on your clients unless you absolutely need to. The cookie policy is in line with government and regulations, and terms and conditions of using your site essentially say that by using this site we hold you accountable for not breaking your computer while you're on our site. Needs to be there. Again, there's templates for these online. If you are trading on your website, you also need to have a statement saying that you are within the UK, just in case someone from anywhere else purchases a product. It would come under their trading laws unless you state specifically that you are in the UK. You also need a sitemap. That is, again, useful for accessibility. It's also brilliant for search engine optimization and just helping people get around your site. So, Oh, I keep talking. Anyway, maintaining your site. Once you have your website, you need to keep it maintained. Just because the development is finished and it looks flashy, in a year's time, if you haven't put any content on that website since that time, then I would consider your site to be a failure, because your organization needs to keep that website going, up to date. So, who's going to be responsible within your organization to do that? They're going to need training. They're going to need to know how to do that. So, make sure that when you have your development of the site done, that the developer will train you in your website and provide a manual for how to update it. It may be using WordPress. They may turn around and say to you, oh, well, there's help files online. You can use Google. Just Google it. It's fine. No, that you're paying for a service. Ask your developer to show you how your website works. They may have used some odd plugins on there. They may have used a strange content management system which you can't get as much support for. Why? I don't know. But particularly if you have bespoke build of your website, make sure that whoever is responsible has received training and that it is knowledge which is in-house. If you've got a support contract, fine, the developers will be able to fix bugs. If you don't, if you can't afford a support contract, then they're going to be reluctant, the developer is going to be reluctant to fix bugs without additional fees. We want to avoid those. So if someone within your organization does understand a bit of code, does understand how your website is working, you can make big savings. Again, be wary of developers who don't want to give you your moral rights. Basic maintenance is keeping your site up to date. The content management system, particularly WordPress, particularly Joomla, they have security fixes that go out very regularly. You need to keep your site up to date, particularly if you're using a lot of plugins on your site. You need to keep those up to date as well, because I think yesterday I was reading that there is 1 million websites out there which are infected because they use WordPress, they didn't update, and a particular plugin, a popular plugin, was compromised. We don't want your site. A plugin. Additional features for the website. So the basic content management system will do articles like newsfeed and your pages of the website, like about us, contact us. But if you say wanted to have a calendar on the website which was drawing from a Google account or a Twitter feed, some people will use a plugin to use that. So like make a little widget on the side of the site which is easier to use. Or they might be using one which works in the back end, which is monitoring how many people are hitting certain pages. So, but if you leave them on your website and you don't update them, much like the content management system, much like Windows, in fact, if you don't keep your Windows up to date, you're going to have issues down the line. So think of it as the same thing. And if you, with plugins, don't install them unless you explicitly need them, because they do tend to be the cause of most of the problems on people's websites. So if you have a web store installed on your site and you don't have a web store, then please uninstall it, or at least shut it down. Limit login attempts. If you forget a password, then it's up to your administrator to change your password for you. Again, making sure that someone in the organization is responsible for doing that. But if you don't limit the login attempts, your site can be vulnerable to what's called a brute force attack, where someone just goes, oh, you've got admin as your username, let's try all the passwords we can, and then they eventually break into your site. Okay. Adam will talk soon. Very soon. Respect your users. This is a sort of crusade of mine as well, is to make sure that when an organization has a website, that they are respecting their users. Your users could be connecting to your site in many different ways. They could be using a laptop, they could be using a mobile phone, they could be using an old mobile phone, they could be using a new mobile phone, a tablet device, they could be using their fridge if the Internet of Things thing keeps going, they could be using a smart TV, you could be using your friend's computer, which is on Linux. You could be using so many different devices to connect to your website, which is one reason why I want to make sure that sites are responsive, and I want to make sure that sites are generally simple, because at the end of the day, you've just got information to give, and I want to make sure that the information which you give is findable and easy to use. So respect the size of your website. Huge images do not respect mobile phones very well. If I'm using, say, this iPhone thingy, I've got a 3G service on there, and I've got a data limit. Every month I hit it, because obviously I'm on mine all the time, tweeting and sending pictures and Instagramming all my food. But if I was a service user and this was my only connection to the internet, I need to be respectful of the data which I'm using on there. So if you are not respectful on your website, you're going to cause them problems down the line. The responsive mobile site should be well under 1 megabyte when it loads. You can test this using various tools online. But it shouldn't have huge images. It should mainly be text. It shouldn't have flash animations going all over the place. It shouldn't link to and start streaming videos straight away, because all of that costs data, and not everyone has a large data limits as we have on our work mobiles. Not everyone has. Some people may be paying as you go with their data, so please be respectful of that. Don't assume how people will connect to you. You've got to be sensible, err on the side of safety, and make sure your site works in all browsers, and make sure that the language which we used degrades gracefully on older browsers. So if you do have a website, as long as you can still get the content which your user needs, if they're using IE6, old versions of Internet Explorer, old versions of Chrome, then that's great. That's what we want. And be sensible. So if something has got a huge flash introduction, maybe tone it down a little bit. Oh, and the next few examples are some fun examples which I found of sites that do not respect their users, because I like examples. Please rotate your device. This is from Google, who assume that they know what way I'm holding this, and they chose to tell me how to use their website. I don't like being told what to do a lot of the time, and your website should work whatever way I'm holding my phone. If you want more examples of those, http wtfmobileweb.com. You know what that means. Here are some other ones. This is why I have a bit of a bugbear against apps as well. You go onto this website, Pinterest, and it asks me to install something. I don't want to install something. I want to use your website, thank you. Keep calm. You need a bigger screen, not a new browser. So you're telling me to buy a new phone. Thank you very much. I just wanted to use your website. And this is my favorite example. You currently have private browsing enabled. Turn off your private browsing in your browser settings to see this website. So they won't let you use CNN Money unless you tell them everything about your phone. Thank you. I don't want to use that website anymore. Be respectful. Allow people to use whatever they want to get your information. And finally, respect your users' data. What information are you taking from your users, and why? We've gone through a year of revelations about the NSA and GCHQ, etc., taking data. I'm not talking about that now. I'm talking about the data which you collect on your clients, from your website in particular. Are you taking information from them? If you have Google Analytics installed on your website, then you are actually taking quite a lot of information from them, which is why you have to have a cookie policy. Sorry. But why are you taking that information? Do you need to? If you want just analytics, are there other ways of doing it? Is it making you responsible for something you don't need to be? There's a lot of documents on the ICO website about how you're storing user data and what you're doing with it. But you can avoid having to comply with all of that if you just don't store the data. That's a useful thing. Why are you asking people to log in with Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon? Because that gives them information about your users. Why are you choosing to do that if you do, of course? Making sure if you do keep data, is it stored correctly? Where is your website hosted? Please make sure that you have your website hosted within the EU if you've got a lot of data on your users. But make sure you know that that's being stored within the EU. And make sure that your users are aware of the data which you are keeping on them. Be transparent. Make sure it's in your privacy policy, cookie policy, and your terms and conditions. And that is me done talking about websites, which means I hand over to Adam, and I'm going to stand over there so you can use that.
Thank you very much. Okay, my part of the presentation is going to be a lot more condensed than James's, but so I'm going to say if you have any questions in the middle of it, please feel free to ask, although we will also be having a question and answer session afterwards as well. I'm going to start off just by giving a rough idea of what a server is. This is as simplified as I could make it, so if there's anybody who's very technical, you might think that this is oversimplified, but I just wanted to get across what each one's for. Now, there are thousands of different types of servers, but the most popular ones that I've come across are domain controllers, mail servers, and file servers. Now, to some of you might be able to guess what they do, but I'll just first talk about a domain controller. If you've got a server at your building, this is most likely what you have. A domain controller lists all the users you have, and it controls their incoming and outgoing activities and what computers they can log into, and it just generally looks after the whole network. And it has most often also has a function called DHCP, which is it controls what IP addresses are allotted to each computer. So in a home environment, your router would be doing this, but in a business environment with a domain controller server, that's what the server's entirely in control of this, because it means that it can select specifically which computers can actually join your network and try and keep away ones that you don't want. A mail server speaks for itself. It holds your emails, controls the accounts, and it connects directly to your domain name if you're using personalized email. And a file server also speaks for itself. It just holds all your files. Very often you might actually find that a file server is incorporated with your domain controller, which means that all the users are registered on your domain controller, and then it'll say who can access what files on your server. And usually when you back up your computers onto the server, it's going into a file server. You'll very often as well find that one server is being used for all three of these services, which is actually really bad practice, because a mail server uses a lot of resources on a computer, or on a server I should say, and if you're letting that affect your domain controller, it means that your network might slow down and the usability of what you can do is really, really limited. Or a company where I used to work that had that for a while, we essentially had to restart the router almost on a daily basis, restart the server on a daily basis, just while we waited for the new server to arrive, because all the resources were being eaten up by our mail server. As I mentioned earlier, this is actually something that I'm really interested in. If you should have a server or you shouldn't. I'm sure everybody who works with me is already tired of all the emails and articles I keep sending them about this. But the reason it actually quite irritates me really when I see a company that have a server when they really don't need it. And the reason I say that is because servers are very expensive to run. Let's say that you have just a standard domain controller server. That could cost you around £100 a month just in electricity to run. And if you don't have on-site IT staff, you're also paying an expensive support contract for that as well, when there are so many different things you can do. I'm going to give you a rough idea of what you can do to replace the three types of servers that we just discussed. Now, in terms of a domain controller server, if you've got less than 15 people on your network, you need to ask yourself if you really need that. Do you need to be able to control who can log on to each individual computer, or does everybody use one computer each? And are you happy just to put a password on each computer and just change it manually when about once every couple of months? Now, if you buy a business-rated router, it'll probably cost you about £180 or up, but that has more than enough power in it to be able to control the IP addresses on the network for maybe up to 30 or 40 separate computers. I don't recommend going up to that number, but like I say, if you've only got 15 computers, that's a much cheaper option than buying a £4,000 server. And when I say a £4,000 server, that's just for the server itself. You usually have to pay upwards of £1,000 or £2,000 just for the software to put on it. And then you've got the support costs on top of it. But most business routers now are, like I said, £180, and it'll do everything you need in that respect. What we have next instead of a file server is what's called a NAS, which is network attached storage. And that might, I recently bought one for about £90, and then I spent £80 on hard drives to put in it. And all that is, it's a little black box that sits in the corner of my house with a cable going in, and I can access those files from any computer in my house. And I've also seen them in use at a lot of businesses. And if you buy a decent one, so let's say maybe £300, you can actually put user control on that. So you can control who can get into what files, and it does exactly what you need a file server to do. Now, if you have that hand in hand with a business router, you've completely negated the need for a file server and a domain controller. And most business rated routers will now have USB 3 ports, which means you can actually plug in USB hard drives. So they'll also work as a file server. So you could actually do it in one package. Now with the email, if anything, with most companies, this is the most important thing to look at. Email servers, if you maybe have 5 to 10 people running emails, then you really don't need a mail server. I'll use an example of a company I visited recently in a moment, but there's so many cloud hosts now available. That means that you can run countless emails in the cloud, and it's probably a lot more secure than your own server if you haven't got your own IT team in the building. And it means that you don't have to pay an expensive monthly support contract. You do have to pay monthly for these accounts, but they usually do come with support enabled. If you're a charity, you can get all that for free. Microsoft actually offer free email hosting for charities within the UK, and I think that's some of the packages they include, I believe, are up to 300 users. If I remember correctly, is that E1? But if you think that you're paying maybe £100 a month in electric for your mail server and £200 a month just for support, that's £300 a month. But if you can get that for free, well, why aren't you doing it? And it's openly advertised, and whenever I mention it to people, they're always really surprised to hear about it. But as I've said in this final point here, why are you paying for something you don't need? Now, the Office 365 that I just mentioned, if you're not a charity, it starts from £3.10 plus VAT per user, which sounds like quite a bit of money, but in comparison to running a mail server, it's so much cheaper. I've actually started using it myself now for my own personal emails, and it's a really good service. Now, Google also offer a similar service, and since we actually put this slideshow together, they've actually dropped their price now to compete exactly with the Microsoft version.
What is it, £3.30 a month?
£3.10 a month.
Is that a monthly fee?
Yeah, per user, which does sound expensive, but the additional thing that comes with it is that they both come with cloud-based storage as well. Both of them come with 1 terabyte each, which is 1,000 gigabytes per user, which in most businesses, people wouldn't even begin to reach even half that capacity. What I would say to point out though, and this is going back to what James mentioned in his, is respecting a user's data and making sure that it's stored in a safe place. With both Office, with Microsoft and Google, they both claim that they are stored within safe areas. Microsoft actually states exactly where your data is kept, and if you're using the paid versions or the free one as a charity, it's stored either in Ireland or in Amsterdam. But the Google Apps one is slightly harder to track down where exactly it's kept, as they store them all over the world. You need to keep your data within the European Economic Area or a safe harbour nation, which both of them do. But as I said, Google Apps might actually keep them in South America if it's classed as a safe harbour nation. Now, all that means is that it's not in the European Economic Area, but it is classed as a safe place to keep it. Although, also, as James mentioned, since the whole thing with the NSA, and the Americans actually have a law in place called the Patriot Act, and if any of your data is stored within any of their states, it means that at any time they can look at it. Obviously, no one in this room really has anything to hide within their businesses. You know, you're not terrorists, but it's just some people might not want to give access to their data so openly to someone else. There are lots of other providers available as well. Yesterday I double checked some prices, and let's say you have a need for email and nothing else. You don't want to share calendars, you just want email and having it backed up. There are companies such as Rackspace that offer, for a price of £67 a month, they will host 50 email accounts for you. And that's all stored within the UK and it's backed up. Now, that's more than any of your organisations might ever need, and it costs almost half what it does to run the electricity alone of the server, and that price also comes with the support that you might need.
There are other, sorry, I'm from WBA, and we've recently been looking at a secure network that we needed for a project that we were doing that couldn't be held on our servers. And one of the issues we had was that it had to be stored within the UK. So of course we couldn't use any of those ones that you're referring to, but there is...
Well, Rackspace that I just mentioned store everything entirely within the UK. I believe their servers are in London and Leeds.
Right.
But there are, that's just one off the top of my head.
I've found one now, which is based in Bournemouth, I believe it is. But there is, I'm trying to remember the name now, is it the eCloud or eGovernment
Yes.
network, isn't there, where if you're a part of the public sector, you can actually purchase directly from them, and you only buy on a monthly basis rather than signing up for
Yeah.
a year, 2 years or whatever at a time. So we hadn't heard of it before, but actually that's really quite useful. And certainly if you need to be in the UK only, then that might be a better alternative.
Because the problem up until I'd say a couple of years ago was that it was very difficult to find providers that were only within the UK. And a lot of providers used to claim that they were, but then their backups were actually stored in cheaper servers elsewhere. But a lot of people are a lot more open about where they actually store your data now. So like I said, Microsoft, you can check, and both your backups and your active data are stored within servers within the EEA. But like I said, Rackspace, just as a quick example, are stored entirely within the UK as well. And now I'm going to talk about hardware and software life cycles, and it sounds very boring, and it pretty much will be to a few of you. But one of the biggest things that I found when we've been going to organisations is walking around and realising that people all hate the computers they're using, and that they say that, oh, it takes them 5 minutes just to start up the computer in the morning after they've shoveled in coal, and you know that everybody's really angry about it. And the way to avoid this is to plan for it, because a lot of companies will go and spend a fortune on computers, and then they'll think, oh, we're safe now till the end of time. But the truth is that a computer after 5 years is, you know, you don't need, it's unusable. Let me just, I personally always recommend a 5-year life cycle. And what that means is that you buy a computer with plenty of room to spare. By that I mean after 3 years, you pay maybe £30 to £100 per computer just to put more memory in it, a larger hard drive, or upgrade the operating system. And then 2 years after that, you prepare to replace the whole system. And in that whole 5 years, you have to think about in the back of your head that you need to put money aside to replace the computers. And don't buy cheap at the beginning either. When I say buy computers with room to spare, there's lots of computers you can buy that are about £300, and they are an excellent specification, and you think, oh, that'll do me. But the truth is, the reason they're that price is that they have all their ports filled up, there is no room to expand, and that computer is as good as it's ever going to be. Now, I would rather have you spend an extra £100 per computer at the beginning, just to know that you can get an extra 2 to 3 years out of that computer. And the moment an operating system becomes unsupported, you should get rid of it. Some of you may know that in April of last year, Windows XP stopped being supported. But despite that, 30% of the world's computers are still running Windows XP, and it's the most popular operating system being used. This is the infection rates from 2012. They haven't actually, Microsoft haven't released the 2014 figures yet. So this was actually taken while Microsoft XP was still under support. As you can see, out of every 1,000 computers that were scanned, 11 of the XP computers had infections, whereas Windows 8, there was less than 1 per 1,000, and Windows 7, less than 4.5. When you the reason I included this graphic is that it made me realise it's the best way of showing how old software is really vulnerable. And just to bear in mind, this was when Windows XP was still supported. So now that it's unsupported, it's not getting any updates, and it means that if you're using it, people are actively trying to find you to be able to send their viruses or malicious software, and there's nothing that Microsoft is doing now to protect you against that. And I actually think that the reason they haven't released the 2014 figures so far is that 11.3 is going to be so much higher now, or they might not even release that figure because it's an unsupported software. But this also goes for server software, such as you got in the bottom here, Windows Server 2003. That's almost double the infection rate of a newer operating system. And Windows 2008 Server is actually still classed as an old server now. Server 2003 is no longer supported, and neither is Office 2003. And those are the XP, Office 2003 and Server 2003, probably the most common pieces of software and operating systems I've seen in every organisation that I visited.
Is the reason that Apple isn't on there is they don't get any?
The reason Apple's not on here is that this was actually put together by Microsoft just to show their own. Apple do get viruses, but it's not as common. But it's mainly because most organisations who will be attacked aren't using it as much, and people aren't actively making malicious software as often as they are for Windows applications. And the same goes for Linux, really. But if you do have an Apple product, I do recommend that you still have an antivirus on it. Now, this is going back to what I said earlier. And the reason I mentioned the £200 to £250 computer is that very often when you go to an ICT supplier and say you want to replace all your computers, they will do whatever they can to try and get you to buy with them. So they will show you their cheapest computer with a decent spec. And if you buy it, that means that you're already out of date almost. Within a year, your computer might be not what you're needing it to be. That was terrible English then, I'm sorry. I actually spoke about that a bit too earlier. But the other one is also data security and backups. This is also usually supplied by your ICT supplier, but you need to make sure that you know exactly where it is and what software they're actually using to do it. Or the other question, are they actually making backups of your software? I mentioned earlier that I was going to use an example, and the organisation I'll talk about now, I'm not going to name by name, and I'm not going to mention their supplier, but they were the epitome of everything I'm talking about here. They had a server in place, they had about 30 computers in the building and 60 members of staff, and they were paying an expensive monthly contract to have someone manage their server and provide support for all their desktops. Now when I got there, I looked at the server, and the server they were using was actually a very low-end user desktop computer installed with server software. Now, when that server was installed, I was in university, and the computer I could afford as a student was better than the one they were using as their domain controller. And for 30 computers, that needs to be quite a powerful server. Now, the other problem was that they were paying an expensive monthly contract for the support and to have backups made. Now, I checked, and the backups weren't happening. The tape drives were full, which tape drives as well are a very old-fashioned way of making backups, and people should move away from that. And the hard drives in the server themselves were actually unhealthy, and not soon after I'd been to meet the company, their server fell over because the parts just stopped working. And I met with their ICT supplier, who swore that every single day that server was being checked by their team of experts. And I was thinking, if you're paying £200 to £300 a month for that service, you're getting nothing out of it. And I also asked where the other backups were stored, and they said that a cloud backup was made, but when I asked if they had evidence of this, they couldn't show it. So essentially this company was paying a large contract, and if their server went down, which it did, they had nothing in place as a backup system to be able to carry on. So when it did go down, there was big panics, and it took them a while just to get hold of me, just because all the emails I'd sent them were stored on the server, and they didn't have access to that. So they couldn't actually find my telephone number. The other thing to make sure as well is when I say use cloud backups for your server, I don't mean use Google Drive or OneDrive or, as it was, SkyDrive. You need a secure server backup system. Now, some of them are quite expensive, but it does mean that if your building burns down with your server in it, at least it's stored elsewhere. They might cost, I know Rackspace do it, and it sounds like I'm actually trying to advertise them here, but it's the last website I happened to be on that was offering the server, and it stuck in my mind. And they charge by how many gigabytes you upload and download, not by how much space you actually use. So if you're doing a cloud backup once a month, it might only be costing you £30 or £40 a month, which is actually a reasonable price to be paying just to know that your data is elsewhere. But if your users are separately storing their own data in professional professional OneDrive or Google Drive accounts, you also know that if the server burns down and their computers burn down, you've got an off-site backup and they've got their own backups, which means that they can actually work from home if you need. And if you've set up a NAS system, like I spoke earlier, on your network, try and keep it as far away from the user computers as you can, just so that if something happens to one end of the building where all the computers are stored, that's on the other end, and hopefully a fire or water damage hasn't reached that part of the building. But also don't use cloud services as your only backup, because you never know, if it's an obscure backup service you're using, that company might go bust overnight, and then you might have trouble getting hold of your backups, or they might not even keep them secure anymore. If you sign up with a company, make sure to read all their terms and conditions, but like I said, still keep a solid backup on site. And that might even just be a USB drive that you back up to once a week, twice a month. It's up to you, as long as you're happy that if your server goes out, you've got your data to a date that you're happy to continue from. Now, a lot of you, I'm sure, have Wi-Fi in your buildings. Can I ask if any of you have a Wi-Fi system in place for guests, or if you let guests use your wireless networks? Yeah, that's quite a few people. Is it, when you say that you let guests use your wireless network, is it a separate network, or do you just give out your password?
Separate network.
And is that password changed often?
Don't know how often, but it is password protected, but no, probably hasn't been changed for at least 6 months.
Okay. Well, the reason I talk about open Wi-Fi networks first is I'll talk about it from your point of view as you being a user. And if you go to another company's building or to a cafe and they've got an open Wi-Fi network, try not to use it if you can, because you never know who's already on there. Or it's very easy. Anyone can learn within a couple of hours how to set up a small computer, put it on a network and leave it, and have it record all your information. If you do have to use an open wireless connection or a shared wireless connection, don't use it for online banking or any sort of online shopping, because, like I say, you never know who's listening. And anything that sends between your computer and the wireless router itself can easily be picked up by anyone with just a little bit of knowledge on how wireless networks work. Which is why if you send emails, they say that it's almost like sending a postcard through the mail, because anyone can see what you've written on it. And the same goes for data packets between your computer and a wireless network.
When it's about online shopping, so you've got an Amazon account or whatever on your phone, you've got it set to automatically log in. Does that mean that it's broadcasting that information in the clear, or if you're connected to a remote access point, then?
It will remember you the moment you connect. If you're accessing that website on an open network, it's sending that information, because
when you're actually accessing it, rather than if just because you're connected.
Well, yeah, well, if you've told your phone to remember your Amazon password, when your phone goes to Amazon on that open network, then it's just that you don't have to type it in. It's the phone that's remembered it, and the phone is still sending your access details, which it might be encrypted, and that's safe to a certain degree, but as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't take much to find a piece of software that will automatically work out what that is. And you look like you'd like to add something there.
I don't know why, but yeah, just as an example, if any of you bought a new Lenovo PC in the last...
Oh, yes, please mention that.
Yeah, this has been in the news. New Lenovo PCs bought in the last year have a piece of software installed on them by Lenovo which broke the HTTPS encryption and inserted their own encryption over the top, just so they could make sure they could send adverts to you which were tailored to your needs. Yet the encryption which they installed bypassed HTTPS, and the encryption which they used wasn't as strong, so was then quickly broken once they realised it was there. So now it's treated as adware, and it needs removing from anyone using a Lenovo PC bought within the last year, because essentially you're not using a secure system, even though it says it is secure, because they installed it out on delivery of your computer, which is nice of them. So.
Now, when you're using your own Wi-Fi network, going back to what James said earlier about passwords and administrator passwords on websites, don't have your username as admin and change the password straight away, because you'd be shocked at how many routers I've seen doing this job with different businesses where their router password is admin and the password is 123 or admin or password. And once you can get in there, you can do anything to that router. You can set up access points for you to be able to remotely access the network from a different place, and that can be done really quickly. And also, always change the SSID, which is the wireless name, because most routers now, when you get them, you'll plug them on and it'll start broadcasting a wireless network, and it'll just be the name of the router. BT hubs in particular, if you switch on a BT hub, it'll be called BT hub 123 or anything like that. The reason you shouldn't be doing this is that anybody who's listening in knows then exactly what router type you're using. So they can then go on the internet, type in a way of breaking specific routers, and they can just run a piece of software that will automatically try and connect to your router, and they'll be able to get in. And you don't need much IT skill for that. You can very easily find them on the internet, because a lot of the times when your website or something will be hacked, it's by what they call a script kiddie, which is just somebody who's downloaded a piece of software that will automatically hack it for them. So as long as you maybe change it to the name of your business, some people would argue against that as well, because it means that they then know whose business it is. But if you're, in terms of home ones, don't use your address or your name. Use some random words or something, just so that people can't pinpoint exactly where you are or who you are. And always make sure that you've got encryption enabled on your wireless network, because it's very easy to break older methods. One of the most common ones to use at the moment is WPA2 Enterprise for your businesses, or there's personal if you're using it for home. It can still be broken, but it's one of the more secure ones that you can use at the moment quite publicly. And don't let any guests use your own wireless network. And if you want to have guests use your wireless, set up a separate one. And what this means is an isolated network. And an isolated network means that even if I manage to log on to your guest network, I can't see other people on it, and I can't see your computers linked to it. So it means that it's very limited to any damage I could do to your business just by using your guest network. But also don't have it open. Make sure that it's a password that is changed regularly. So if somebody comes for a meeting and they use your wireless and they log into it, when they come back a week later, they have to put in a new password. So it means that you've not got someone sitting outside in your car park using your wireless network, downloading God knows what, something that could get you in trouble. And if possible, have a policy that people have to agree to when they sign into your wireless router. The router I mentioned earlier, the £180 one, is by a company called Reichelt. It's a business router, and that actually has, like most business routers now, have built-in guest networks that operate as separate networks themselves, and you can set them up so if somebody wants to log into it, they have to give their details when they try and log onto your network, so you know who they are, and you can block them if you want. They can even be set up so that if somebody wants to connect, it then sends an email to your administrator, who then has to yes if they can use it. I'm sure a lot of you have tried to connect to a McDonald's wireless network, and I tried that once, and I got so tired of trying to connect to it that I decided I'd just rather not check the internet, because you have to send a text with your telephone from your telephone number, and they send it back with a code to your email address that you then use to connect to their network. So it means that they already know who you are, both by email and by telephone number.
And services like the cloud and things as well, that's why you have to log in every time, because you're giving them your location, your email, telling them all about what you do on that network. Although it may be preferable to use a service like the cloud within your organisation if you do have a public-facing area or something, because it takes the hassle of having all the policies and all the responsibilities away from you and onto the cloud, but do understand what you're making your users sign up for in the first place.
And before I end my part of it, I'm just going to talk about one more client that I recently had, which once again will remain nameless. I met with them about a month ago, and they had an excellent IT guy on site. But what he said to me is that he didn't feel comfortable managing a server, which is fair enough. It's not often you'll get an IT person that will admit to their limitations. But they had the server in place for running 8 computers. And I just couldn't get my head around that. Although he did then say that it also operates as their mail server, which runs 30 mail accounts. This company was also a charity, but despite that they were paying roughly £200 a month just for server support, and I estimate roughly £100 a month in electricity. And I've been advising them, and we're hoping that they'll make the change soon, but they'll be getting rid of that server, moving to a pre-hosted email system. And because he's obviously more than comfortable in fixing all the desktop computers, they won't have that server, so they no longer need the support contract. So instantly they're saving £300 a month. And there are some other things that we'll be removing as well to save them even more money. When you consider this as a charity that was just throwing £300 a month away for almost no reason, it'd be interesting to see in your own organisations how money's being wasted. And both James and myself will be around all day today and tomorrow, and if you see us and you've got any questions, feel free to come and bother us if you just see us hovering about. So, that's the end of it.
Yes.
If you'd like to get in contact with us, here's our details.